All set? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 24th. This is the 4 o'clock Town Council Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Colette, would you take the roll call?
Certainly. Councillor Clucci,
Here.
Councillor Gleisteen,
Here.
Councillor Anderson.
Here.
Thank you.
The next item is to approve the minutes from our February 24th meeting. Thank you for preparing those, Colette. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Councillor Clucci.
Yes. Oh, wait. Were you
Second.
caught? Did you second, Betsy?
I did.
Okay, go ahead, Colette. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Councillor Clucci,
Yes.
Councillor Gleisteen,
Yes.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Awesome. Next up, we have, it's not on the agenda, but Tom shared with me a video that had been prepared by staff to help inform and educate the public about our budget process. And I don't know if you have that queued up, Tom, or if it's something that you can share.
Yeah, this is something Allison's put together. It's intended to be just in advance of the budget, and you'll see the content can be modified slightly after budget's released. But I think something like that will keep up there because it's a good primer. It's about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So if you indulge us, we'd like to just share that with you. This is something Allison's put together. It's intended to be
If there's sound, I can't hear it. I don't know about anyone
can't
else.
either.
So let's learn more about how you can be involved.
Bear with me. This is the thing I should have learned last time I played a video. All right, we're gonna try again. Here you are.
Welcome to the budget portal, accessed through the Town of Scarborough website. Each spring, Scarborough undergoes a municipal budget process. Our community is critical in shaping town and school budget discussions. So let's learn more about how you can be involved. In an effort to achieve this goal, the Town of Scarborough and Scarborough Public Schools have created a budget portal for you to easily access all budget-related information. This is your go-to source for budget process updates, important dates and documents, and more. Let's walk through the site together. To access the budget portal, head to scarboroughmaine.org and click the budget process button on the homepage. Now you are on the budget portal. You'll see quick links for current budget information, schedule, calendar, last year's budget information, and ongoing communications. The fiscal year 2022 link will contain this year's budget document. It is several hundred pages long and contains narratives introducing the process, highlighting town financials, and identifying budget needs for each department. This is the ultimate resource and reference point for all budget-related discussions. Next, let's go to the budget adoption schedule. These documents show a full picture of all upcoming budget-related key dates from March through June. The public is invited to participate in any of the meetings listed. Back on the homepage, you'll see a button for the budget calendar. This is how you can access links to view or participate in meetings and read agendas. They are updated weekly. If you miss a meeting, you can access recordings from our YouTube channel. Next, you'll find the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget document. This was adopted in June 2020 through the same process that is currently underway. This document follows the same format each year. Lastly, from the budget portal homepage, you can access budget communications. This is a resource for articles that have been put out by the town regarding this year's budget process. It will be updated through the season, so check back often to stay informed. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about how you can engage with the municipal budget process. We encourage you to check back on our budget portal often. By being an engaged citizen, you play a critical role in shaping the town of Scarborough into a vibrant place to live and work.
So this is part of the build up to the budget. This is introducing the resource. Obviously, it's not fully populated, and I think a similar video, different kind of voiceover will probably maintain throughout, just so people can get acquainted with what resources are there. So that's just one of the points along the communication plan.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, that looks great. I had a question. The tab budget communications, would that also maybe include some of the PowerPoints at the meetings, or would the better place to get that information still be like the meeting packets?
You'll get them both, but no, the intent is the budget portal is the go-to place. So anything budget related will be there. And
Okay.
if one of our preset tabs doesn't fit right, we'll modify and add another. But the intent is to have everything budget related there in one spot.
Okay, wow, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's a good step forward. Just getting some organization to the budget portal back, and I think the intro video is informative. It's helpful for people who choose to watch it. So, step in the right direction.
Yeah, so I think we'll feature that probably through social media posts by the end of the week or early next week. Then also through the upcoming newsletter, e-newsletter, and obviously it will be on the website itself.
It's pretty short. Could we run it April 7 and April 11? I mean, in the meetings? I mean, it's, what is it, less than 2 minutes?
Yeah, just over 2. Yeah, that's fine. I can talk to Paul and find out where to put that. But yeah, sure.
Okay, good. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, we have, I believe, some representatives from Avesta Housing to follow up on our prior meeting in reviewing the CA request. Tom, do you want to give some intros?
Yeah, Nate Howes has been our primary contact. He's one of the development officers. I know Nate was traveling this afternoon. So Liam, could you permit Rebecca Hatfield in? And perhaps there are others that I'm not aware of once she gets in. As you're pulling her in, there were essentially 5 different subject areas or areas of questions that came up at your last conversation around this topic last month. Those being kind of additional data on wait list, parking utilization rates, the different services that they may provide for residents on site, market demand for senior housing, and then details of their financial performance. And so I believe their submission, and we can share that screen if you like, does address each of those 5 areas. Hi, Rebecca. Is there anyone else that should be permitted in and be part of the conversation?
No, it's just me today.
Just you. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming. You provided a pretty comprehensive response to the questions that came out of our last meeting. It's pretty detailed. Would you like to take a few minutes to walk through the items? Or
Sure. I've prepared something with the help of Nate, and he gave me a little bit of a background. And Nate apologizes for not being able to be here tonight. He's traveling, but he will be joining the Housing Alliance meeting later tonight. So yeah, I'm happy to summarize what we submitted.
Okay, fantastic.
helps.
Should we bring up any visuals for you, or are you good?
I don't think so. I mean, you have the copy of the submittal, and I'm basically going to just go right through it as it was submitted, so you could follow along through that document.
Rebecca, would it be distracting to you if we have Liam share that up on the screen?
Not at all.
Do you have that, Liam? Assuming that your presentation follows the order here.
It does to some extent.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it'll be helpful to have it up on there.
Okay.
Just to formally introduce myself, I'm Rebecca Hatfield. I'm the Senior Vice President of Real Estate at Avesta. And I know at the last meeting, which was on February 24th, we presented a summary of our planned development site at the former police building and fire stations on US Route 1. We also requested a credit enhancement agreement for 75% for a period of 20 years and highlighted its importance both programmatically and financially. To reiterate, this proposal will require a TIF for financial solvency and competitiveness under Maine Housing's programming. So in response to our request, the committee presented Avesta with several questions and follow-up items. The committee asked for analysis of housing demand, the need in the Scarborough market, our parking utilization rates, Avesta's waitlist data, Avesta Senior Services, and the project's financial model. In response to the question of market demand, we have provided components from 4 different market analyses. We should note that all data is for the Greater Portland market, also known as the Portland HMFA, and HMFA stands for HUD Metro Fair Market Area, and it's how HUD delineates geographic areas based on the market and need, because Scarborough alone is simply too small for demand to be adequately captured by these various data sets. Having established the market in question, we included the Department of Housing and Urban Development's housing statistics for the market area. HUD separates the households by income level and differentiates housing conditions between those households with conditions and those without conditions. With conditions is considered substandard or rent burden households, so households that have incomes that have rent that's more than 30% of their income. The HUD data indicates that there are approximately 7,000 of these households in the market. We further included Maine Housing's analysis of the Greater Portland market, which paints a similar picture. Also, this data shows that all households, not just those of age 55 plus. We also took a more close-up picture of the market by comparing this project to the market study for our current development in Gorham. And finally, based on Avesta's own experience and analysis, we have determined that we are only able to help 1 of 8 older adults of age 55 plus that come to us for housing. All 4 of these market analyses demonstrate a robust market and high demand for affordable housing for older adults in Scarborough. Our parking and waitlist data points were also included in the follow-up packet for your consideration. The parking data is derived from annual property surveys of our property management and maintenance staff. The table provided in the package was derived from these surveys and was used in local approvals process in Gorham. The ratios indicated in the table still hold, and we are confident that 0.7 spaces per unit is more than sufficient parking for this development. Meanwhile, the waitlist data is derived directly from our property management databases, and if anything, understates the need for affordable housing, as waitlists are managed differently based on regulatory requirements and open vacancies. I do want to note that the 2 properties on the list with the highest totals, Park Street School and Ridgewood 2, have open waitlists due to the need to fill vacant units. The waitlist data at these 2 properties is more representative of the demand.
Liam, that's on page 1, just so you know.
My apologies, I am jumping around a little bit. So we've also included a delineation and explanation of the senior services we provide, either directly or through third parties. At Avesta, we understand that our senior properties are more than just apartments, they're homes. Indeed, for those downsizing from a single family home to one of our buildings, their unit may be the last home they own. To that end, it's important that the buildings act as both a community and a service hub. As noted in the report, we provide classes on financial literacy in addition to a litany of healthcare clinics. For instance, just over the past few months, we have been working with regional providers to deliver vaccines on site to our residents. In addition, at move-in and annually during the income recertification process, we perform check-in with our residents to ensure that their unit is meeting the needs both from a comfort and an accessibility perspective. Our goal is to create a home with services where residents can age in place. Finally, we've also attached our project budget. You can see from the budget, the project budget is all the way down at the bottom of the document. You can see from the budget that the sources of funds for the project come from LIHTC Equity, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston's Affordable Housing Program, the Scarborough Housing Alliance, and Maine Housing Debt. The credit enhancement agreement of 75% for 20 years is what allows Avesta to borrow over $2 million in Maine housing debt. Without the TIF, the development would not be financially feasible. We're also happy to discuss any other elements of the budget with you. It should be noted that the rental income is derived directly from the rents in the program, and the operating budget is based off of comparable properties with an inflation factor built in, as which how we normally budget.
Liam, you've gone way past, it's probably page 10 or so. I'll stop you
And that concludes my summary. So I'll open it up to questions.
Yep, that's good, Liam.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Just to note, we also included in our packet the submission to the Housing Alliance, because that meeting is going to be taking place, I believe, at 6 o'clock this evening. So that's where Liam was scrolling down. A lot of that material was standard request information for the Housing Alliance. I'm going to open it up to questions for Betsy and John.
I'm sorry to double check if I was on mute. Yeah, there's a lot of good information in here that would be good to dive down to at some point and understand, kind of where some of it came from. But definitely appreciate all this information, and it's definitely helpful. Thank you.
You're on mute, John.
And I can't find the page that I wanted to reference, so I'm struggling to find it. But the question I have, and again, this has come up, and I've heard this number, and I don't know if it was just an estimate that was thrown out there. But what I'm really trying to understand is, over the 20-year period, if we were to provide the CEA, what would be the impact? Because when I looked at the data, because somebody had thrown out like $500,000 over the course of 20 years at some point. And then when I added up the numbers, I saw it looked like it was closer to $1 million. So I'm just trying to understand, over the course of the 20 years, what's the total contribution the town's making to this project?
Yeah, that was shared at the last meeting. I'll see if I can pull it up. Rebecca, I'm not sure if you have that.
I do have it. Let me, I can pull it up here.
I printed it, John. I see what the total is, but there was a column that said projected total TIF revenue to development. And then there's numbers there where I think they increased the tax rate and then dropped it back down.
Yes.
And increased it, dropped it back down, I guess, for revals or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then I assumed their math was right. I did, so do you know what column and numbers you added up?
I added up the TIF revenue contribution over the 20-year period.
And it didn't come out to 501,315?
No, I think that's where I got it.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I have the spreadsheet. Do you want me to pull that up for you?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I just might have looked at the numbers wrong.
I don't know if you can see this. I tried to.
And Rebecca, I just want to verify, this is in fact the one that reflects the request, 75% for 20 years?
Correct.
Okay.
This is my understanding from Nate. This is the one that both of you had worked on and reviewed. Yes.
I think, John, you're looking at column L.
Yeah. So what was the difference then between the new document we got that had that same topic of TIF revenue per the developer? Because again, I think the numbers started more at like $40,000 in the new attachment and went all the way up to like 60 or 70 in the out years.
Oh,
I'm not sure what you're referring to, John.
in the prospectus?
Let's see. Sorry, I was trying to find it. I should have bookmarked it.
I mean, to some extent, it's going to depend what the assessed value of this piece of the parcel is. Right now, I think this is assuming 1.65 million, which is based off of the rents that they expect to be charging.
Yeah, this is a customary projection, and of course, there need to be assumptions built into it. So assessed value and build out is one of them. Tax rate over time is another. I believe the assumptions made here were 3% growth of tax rate, and then a drop down caused by a reval. Whether those numbers are exactly right, that's certainly could be a point of discussion. But this is intended to be as true and accurate a reflection of performance over time, given a number of variables that will undoubtedly change.
So based on the spreadsheet that was shared and based on what's on page 13 in the packet, again, those blue highlighted items where we start with in year one, it has TIF revenue listed at 37,500. If we add all of those up from year 1 to year 20, again, that's more than 500,000. So what is it exactly that the town's contributing? Is it what's listed on this page on slide 13, or is it the 500,000?
I see what you're looking at. It's the last page in the packet for this meeting. I do see the difference in the numbers. I don't know what assumptions were made in the pro forma. I am familiar and comfortable with the numbers in this presentation here. Rebecca, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah. Let me just pull that up and I can potentially speak to that. So the number you're referring to in the budget.
It's your pro forma operating income and expense statement.
And are you looking specifically at the property tax line item?
Yeah, there's two blue bands, or there's a blue band that includes that number.
Oh, the TIF revenue.
Yes.
I would need to follow up with Nate on that. I'm not quite sure the assumptions that he put in the pro forma. And so I'm not sure if he updated this after the TIF projections were put together or if this was done prior to that. And so we just need to reconcile it. But I can certainly follow up on that and provide the answer to the council.
I think that would be really helpful, because again, if these numbers are the numbers we're making decisions off of, then it doubles that 500,000. So I'm just trying to make sure we're making the recommendation on the right numbers.
I do remember Nate saying at the last meeting that the assessor would probably come in higher than the 1.6 million. You remember it's costing about 8.2 to build the project out. So usually, I think he said the assessor comes in somewhere between what it costs to build it versus what it's worth based on rents. I think it would be helpful to understand what the assumption is on the pro forma though. Another way I think of it, John, though, is this property is generating zero taxes right now. And if this project happens on this portion of the property, it will generate positive tax income. And then the rest of the property is also going to presumably start generating positive tax income now as well. So I guess it depends how you determine cost, right? So we're going to be bringing in more revenue regardless, because we're not giving away more than we're collecting. And then the question is, how much does it cost to service this, this parcel or this new development?
Well, I think we've talked in the past about, especially we were talking about Jocelyn, what's the opportunity cost there? What will go there if this doesn't go there? Mm-hmm. So if it was, say, 10 townhouses at market rate, what does the town get, revenue wise from that versus what we're looking at? So yeah, definitely it's going to generate some revenue either way. The question becomes, how much and what's the opportunity cost?
What's right. And you can go down a bunch of hypotheticals. Right now we have one in front of us that is fairly well defined and fleshed out. And that's, yeah, when you get to the numbers, I guess it's going to be somewhat subjective for us, right? There's always going to be assumptions built in. And it's going to be a matter of our personal, I guess, sentiments, whether it's something that's a good call for the town. But I think regardless, I think the good thing about this particular piece of property is it's generated no revenue for the town and it's going to start generating revenue. I think no matter what happens there.
Well, it should start pretty soon, right? Because someone owns it and it's valued at 1.9 million. So I'm not quite sure how all that worked with the timing, but it is owned now in private property. So it's always had a value. It's just we didn't charge ourselves tax because it's our own property. So it didn't make sense. But now we don't own it. So it's going to start generating revenue as soon as that tax is paid. So it's not like no matter what, we're going to be getting tax revenue, even if not one thing is ever done to that, because it's private property now.
That's right.
And we wouldn't even be talking about it if there wasn't a CEA request because it's private property. They have, other than if they needed a zoning change, they have every, ability to do whatever the zoning allows on that property.
Yeah, and just to remind you, value is as of April 1st of every year, and ownership at that moment in time matters too. So
right. Yeah, it gets really tricky.
Right. To Councilor Gleistein's point, as of 10 days from now, it's in private ownership and it will be taxed accordingly.
It's like when a new house builds, it doesn't end up on the tax rolls for way after you think it's going to, so it is
Right.
definitely a tricky thing. Well, I don't know, John or John, do either one of you score the project? Nate took a stab at it. I think my understanding of part of the reason of bringing this back today was we were somewhat walking through the process of our CEA TIF financial policy, even though we know that these don't fit in as well as we'd like, and probably need an additional policy for subsidized housing and CEA related to CEA credits. But did either one of you score the project?
I have not. I feel like I should probably elaborate on what you just said, just for transparency.
Okay, thank you.
So this was, Betsy was proposing to bring this to our last council meeting for a vote on whether to move to the next step, which the next step in this process is whether the town council wants to authorize the town manager to form a negotiation team to further vet and work through the details. I encouraged her to bring it back because we had requested a number of additional data points to bring it back to finance so that we could close things out here. We don't have clearly defined definition on how we close things out at finance, other than I wanted to at least, if it's going to come to a vote at the council, to be able to use the time that we've put and the effort that you've put into it to inform that decision to the extent possible. And that could take the form of either we move it out of committee with a recommendation, or we just agree that we need to move it back to the council. And in terms of, I'm open, I guess I'll open the floor to what the committee feels the logical next steps would be. And I'd like to thank you, Rebecca, for coming today and for providing all of this additional detail. I think it's been very helpful. And I think you've clearly demonstrated that there's a need for this type of housing in Scarborough. And we're happy that you put the effort in to help us vet and explore this opportunity.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your consideration and hearing what we have to say today. The project is very, very important to us, and we definitely believe the need is there. And I know that we're making asks from the town, but we do strongly believe in this program, and we do believe that it will benefit the town and is the right way to go. So appreciate your time and consideration today.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions for Rebecca or the developers?
No, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, there was a lot of detail there, like you said, John. And so, I'm not sure that it makes total sense. I think the data kind of stands on its own, but if we were gonna dive into it, there were some that was really, was kind of led me to a question, especially around rental information and how it was derived, that we have total renter households of 4,431. Or is that, no, let's see, Scarborough, we had total rental households of 16. So it would just be interesting at some point to kind of to figure out, where some of those numbers derive from. And I know it comes from Maine Housing, but it'd be great to understand it better.
I mean, do you want to go to that page? I think we have people that might be able to answer that.
No, I think like you were saying, I mean, they made it clear they can't break it down for Scarborough, which makes sense. And they, there's definitely a need. There's a need in the area. I found it kind of interesting, that they said that in terms of the median 2-bedroom rent, Scarborough had almost the highest of anyone at 2,179, but we have, we've had a lot of, we did a contract zone for luxury apartments, that provide, garages, fitness center, pool, dog walking area. So, then the affordability index is kind of calculated off of what we already have. That was a little bit confusing. I'm sorry. It's page 8. And then, how are we deciding how many people want to live in 2-bedroom apartments as opposed to people who already live here in Scarborough and want to stay in their home? So it's very interesting. I'm not sure we have to dig into the detail, but I was kind of curious, where some of these figures came from.
Okay. Rebecca, is that something that you would like to respond to? I mean, I assume a lot of this is standard analysis that you do.
Yeah, the reports that we provided are generated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and by Maine Housing. So we don't conduct those studies, but it generally is a way in which we measure market need, and as they do the assessment properly. And so, however, again, I could go back to Nate. Nate did work at Maine Housing, so he has much more insight into some of these studies and how they conduct them. And I could get some information for you on that.
Yeah, it is funny though. And in no way, is this a criticism of you guys, but is it, so it says South Portland, MA housing market. So what is MA?
Market area.
Okay, market area. Okay, all right, thank you.
And I guess I want to be clear so we don't go down the same path. Are you looking for additional information, Betsy, on this?
No. Sometime it might be fun to have a talk with Nate and kind of figure out how all this works. That would be really, really interesting to me. But no, I'm not asking for anything else to be provided, but he has a wealth of information. So it does help to understand some of the background of how some of this works.
Yeah, and I think some of the constraints are tied to how data is collected and aggregated by the Census Bureau and other resources. So, and it has to do with the credibility of a small subset of data. Basically, we don't have enough. Maybe we're close to it now, but at least historically, we haven't enough households to make some of these determinations on a purely Scarborough basis. They have to look at a broader geographic area, and that's
Right.
pretty standard.
But yeah, it's much appreciated and very interesting.
Okay.
John, I know there's been some question around, senior housing, whether we have enough or we've done our share, what have you. I mean, the undeniable fact is the funding agency and these projects need a subsidy. That's just the case. Are favoring through their scoring system senior housing as the targeted demographic, and we can question why that's so, but the fact is that's the decisions they've made. And so, not surprisingly, the affordable housing development community is playing by the rules that are in front of them right now, and those rules could change as soon as next year. They do modify their incentives through their QAP process, but it is what it is this year. And so it's an interesting conversation point, but that's where the subsidy is. So that's why it's in front of us the way it is.
So that's an interesting point, Tom, too. And it's something I've given a lot of thought to about what's the right fit for Scarborough in terms of affordable housing, or where we can have the most bang for the buck. And senior housing, building more of it is not a bad option for Scarborough, I guess, in my opinion. I wish there were more books on this, but what's going to happen is some people are going to move out of their homes and they're going to downsize, and that's going to open up those homes for other people, presumably with families, a lot of times with families, to move into the area. And I counter that against developing subsidized open housing or family housing, similar to the other Avesta property in town. And given our age demographic and that we're an aging community, I really feel like the need is more there on the senior side for people moving, either retiring or working on fixed incomes or struggling to stay in their property. I feel like that's where there's more of a need relative to Scarborough than families in Scarborough that are here that are going to be forced out of their homes or their living situation. So I guess I just wanted to share that. You're right. You have to follow the money on this. They're incentivizing senior housing, and I guess in my opinion, that's not necessarily a bad thing for Scarborough. I think there's some room for it.
Tony, just to follow on to what you're saying, that, I've spoken across towns across Maine, and they say the same thing, why senior housing, and what we've heard often, and this has been corroborated by brokers who are on the ground and real estate agents, is when we build, what you're saying is exactly what happens. And that is seniors within the town vacate their homes and move into our housing because they need affordable housing that can support them long term. And the housing stock that's being vacated actually tends to be just right for younger families, lower income families, because they tend to be an older housing stock, smaller homes. And so there is kind of this natural churn where even though we're developing senior housing, we're still also helping families on the back end. And it's not just in Scarborough, we've seen evidence of this across the state.
So there may be some thought that went behind the incentives. I guess they're there for a reason. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, I was thinking of, perhaps we want to have a vote and a motion on the table so we can have some discussion. Sounds like, we kind of are having some just general discussion, but discussion on the project per se.
I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to recommend to the town council that we reject the credit enhancement agreement request by Avesta Housing Development Corporation at the property located at the former public safety building site. Okay. So I'd like to make a motion.
Sorry. I heard you the first time. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes, request.
Okay.
Motion's been made and seconded. And any discussion?
The former public safety building site. I don't know what all the echo is. Do we know? Or?
Colette, can you
Yes.
turn off Colette?
I heard you first. Oh, wait a sec. Okay. All right. So now we've got a motion has been made by Betsy and seconded to reject the CEA request, or recommend rejecting. We don't have the authority to reject it, but to recommend rejecting the CEA request.
And it could have been worded positively, so no one should read into anything that it was worded negatively. But so it's a good project, and I really appreciate all the information. There's a couple of reasons right now why I don't support it at this time. The first one is when the voters of Scarborough approved the new public safety building. It was a very hotly contested vote, and it was very close. And one of the provisions of that vote was that we sell and basically turn back to the tax rolls this particular property. And we learned in the last meeting that Avesta would need to purchase this property for $500,000, that corner of that property for $500,000. And then depending on the numbers that you look at with the CEA, we're going to be taking a credit enhancement of 500,000 to $1 million. And then I personally still feel that the request for funds from the affordable housing fund that we have in place is separate from this. So I could see a scenario where that gets approved, but the CEA maybe does not. So I could see that, these two things are not exactly the same thing from the taxpayer standpoint. And as I said before, it's private property. So, this project, it would be great to see it go forward without a CEA or something similar that, would bring some value to the town. So that's one. I think, the second thing is sometimes it feels a little tough to me, what people in Scarborough can count on. I think if you had put in the provision, well, we might give a tax break on this property when it's developed out, who knows what people would have thought about it in the referendum. But we've made 2 zoning changes to help accommodate this property already. And there would be a third change we would need to make to a CEA boundary change, to a TIF boundary change. The residents behind this property, have already had the property change zoning, and then we increased the height. So we rezoned this twice for, for a project that was not going to include a CEA. Whatever my opinion was or whatever I wanted to do on that, doesn't really matter. The council decided that. And I just think there are things that, the taxpayers in Scarborough need to be able to count on, and the residents need to be able to also count on, some of the zoning choices that we make and some of the, a TIF boundary that we decide on. These things people should, even developers should want to know that. And I do know that, the COVID has been really challenging for everyone, for all developers. Although development seems to be going great guns, commercial is not going as well. But, we did work with the purchaser of this property, and we delayed the purchase till August, which was advantageous to us and to them. And I don't know if anyone remembers, but at the time, I publicly, thanked the town manager because I felt like he did a really good job, keeping that going. But the reality is that by August, there was a really good view of what was happening with COVID. When it first started, who the heck knew? So, I think that we didn't change, the rules changed in the middle for all of us, but I feel like, we all stepped up to the plate and said, hey, let's just see if we can still make this deal work. And of course, at that time that we extended that deal, we also expected that there was not going to be a CA requested. And I do understand that things have changed, but, I'm still hoping that, we can get something closer to the original thing that we asked for. And I have a fourth one, but I didn't jot down my notes, so I will stop talking there and then add that if it comes back to me.
Thank you, Betsy. John, any comments?
Yeah, I think I would be supportive of this recommendation going forward back to the council. I think a lot of what Councillor Gleistein just mentioned was a lot of things probably outside of the finance committee specifically in terms of looking at the data and the numbers, because I think the project as it stands alone looks really good financially based on the pro forma and everything that was shared. However, similar, there are other things that are happening right now that I think as a council we need to kind of work through, including the GMO and also getting through the budget. This year is going to be a restorative year for the budget. And I'd really like to understand, a little bit better what that ask is before we would approve a CEA at this time. And as it relates to senior affordable housing, I understand the demand is there. We've been doing a lot of senior affordable housing lately in Scarborough. I think over maybe it's been a while, or I forget the number from the last finance committee meeting, but I think it was somewhere in the range of like 400 or maybe 200 new units that we've approved for affordable housing for seniors with CEAs. And so I want to make sure, especially as we move forward with the GMO, that we're thinking holistically about the needs, not just around senior affordable housing. And I feel like we've done a lot of that up to this point. And I want to make sure we're looking more holistically at the rest of the needs across the town too, to see if, there might be other areas we'd want to offer some sort of tax incentive. And then also I think in the last call, it's still not very clear to me, based on what Nate shared, like how some projects require CEAs, some don't. So in some cases, you're able to get the funding you need to move forward with the projects. And I don't really understand fully why this particular project requires a CEA when it might not be required all the time. So that's kind of where I sit right now.
Thank you, John. So I'm in the minority here. I wholeheartedly support this project and think that it would be a fantastic addition to the town and to this area, and that there is a demonstrated and very real need for this type of housing. We have a goal from our comp plan to try to match about 10% of our new dwelling units that are built over a period of time to be affordable. And over the past decade, we've seen that we did okay, but we're about 5%. And to make up for that ground in the next decade, we're going to have to leverage this time where a lot of development is happening. We've got 288 units that just went in at the Beacon that are luxury. They paid an in lieu fee to get the ability to be able to create all those units. And, that money is intended to subsidize projects like this. And I think, Betsy, you're right. That's not the only way it can happen, right? We could have instead of an alliance and a housing authority that could be charged with developing this type of housing, but somehow, some way, I think we need to use the money, or we have to give it back at some point now. We've done pretty well over the past couple of years with projects. So the other thing is I did take the time to meet with the neighbors, and Betsy's correct. I did point out after our last meeting that where this is currently being proposed to be sited on the former public safety site is not currently part of our downtown TIF district. When I met with the neighbors, there were a number of concerns, but from what I was hearing anyways, the primary one was the proximity of the building to their houses. And to me, the next step in this process isn't to approve a CEA, is to form a team to negotiate. And I think that's a logical next step for the council to move to further vet this. Because if it's, right now we have some leverage over what happens and how it happens on this particular site because they want something back from the town. If it's purely market rate and purely based on zoning, then we don't. And I don't know what plan B is or C is for this development. I'm quite confident that something will happen there. I'm not confident that it would be more appealing to the neighborhood or the neighbors than what is currently before us. So I would like to see us, further vet the opportunity. But go ahead.
Yeah, can I make another comment? Yeah, the in lieu of fee fund is definitely separate from a CEA. So we have, since I've been on the council, we've granted $250,000 from that. And I believe Avesta also got money from that for the project that they did up on Route 1. So, I mean, if you're saying you want to take in lieu of and apply that to the CEA, I don't know, maybe that's something that could be looked at. As far as I understand, they can still request money from that in lieu of fund. These two things are separate. Mm-hmm. And, I do think, John Anderson's points about kind of looking at the town as a whole and all the needs we have in front of us now is something that makes this one kind of tough at this time, asking for a CEA of somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. So the the council can vote. Like you said, we're at a step, but we're not in the development business, And, we actually even had a resident email us and say, well, what would be done on this property if we don't do the CEA? And, a lot of folks were pretty excited about the workforce housing potential. So, I think we only have one thing in front of us, and that is just to decide, and if it's a good time to grant a CEA or not. The project itself, it's a good project, but is it the right time for the town to do a CEA for another 55 and older? Well, I think Jocelyn was 62 and older, but so that, I just wanted to say that the in lieu of is separate from the CEA.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I'm just a bit confused, I guess, on process. And forgive me, this is new for all of us. We now have a CEA policy that doesn't quite fit, but we're trying to use it. It strikes me that makes sense to the extent that there's applicability. My recollection of that policy is that the Finance Committee has a key role, and that is to really dig into the financials of a request and be the resource to the full council to understand those aspects. And I fully appreciate that all of you have history, have opinions, don't necessarily agree with the policy, but I'm asking whether or not that's what you should be considering. It strikes me that if we're going to work down that CEA policy process, your focus really ought to be on the financial aspects as opposed to other things that may ultimately inform your opinion about a matter as a town councilor. I'm not admonishing, I'm just asking the question as to what role does this committee play?
It's fair. John, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Yeah, that's why I kind of opened my comments a little bit of, if you look at this from strictly a financial perspective, what would it be that we would want to say as a committee? And then some of those other things that I think all three of us kind of mentioned, that's probably more appropriate for at the council level for the discussion, because it's really a lot of outside factors outside of probably what the committee is charged with that might ultimately inform our decision. But I will say, as it relates to the CEA, to go back to Betsy's comment earlier about the scoring, I attempted to go through and do the scoring myself. But again, I really did feel like as I was doing it, it was kind of like apples to oranges a little bit, because it was developed for economic development, not necessarily for, the specific affordable housing. So it didn't really feel like that criteria that was established for this particular project applied very well. And then even, looking at how Avesta scored themselves, they would, they did a great job, but in some cases they would look to the broader development and supporting their score, but we're really just focused on this particular piece of property from a CEA perspective. And so I think that was just like one of the questions I had as I was going through it, is like how would we count that, or would we not count that as we look at this particular investment? Because the CEA, as I understand, is specifically for this property, not for the entire development site that's going to be associated with this particular property.
Yeah, I think I just add that Tom, to that point, I think what I learned through this process is that it's probably not a good fit to try to force an affordable housing request through our economic development TIF policy. And I've given it some thought, and we do have a housing authority. Maybe that's the appropriate channel to initiate and vet and bring this forward. But it was put on our plate. It was delegated to us, I think pretty clearly by the council. And I think we've certainly vetted the financial aspects of this I think very thoroughly. So I'm pleased with that. And I think we can, when we bring it back to council, include some of those summaries for, this is what the financial impact would be. This is what the request is. And we can be, I think we all agree on some of those things anyways. Go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, I think it was a really good question, Tom. I went back through the policy and I don't have it, you try to have everything in front of you that you think you're going to want to refer to. And of course I don't, but So I believe it's step 6 that we're up to. And, while the policy doesn't fit perfectly, there are some steps in there. They asked the finance committee to look at things. And then there it didn't say we had to have a vote, but, to kind of recommend out to the council at whole. And then the step that's in there at step 6, my understanding of the purpose of that particular step was to say whether or not, we would even go forward at all in looking further into the project from the town perspective, related to the CEA. So if the councilors don't believe that, or do believe that it's worthy to continue, then there would be, for further discussions and things like that. So I think that's the step that we're at for the finance committee, either formally or informally. We have a motion on the table, to make a recommendation, however we frame it. And then the council at large would vote on whether or not to continue forward in the process. That's my understanding of it. I did go back through it because it's a really good question.
Yeah, I think we have a motion to move it out with a negative recommendation. And I think that's totally within the scope of what was given to us. I think that's one of the options that we can go back to council with. So I don't disagree. I think your motion is valid. And is there any other discussion on it? Okay, Liam, would you call the vote?
Sure. Counselor Gleisteen,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci,
No.
vote 2-1.
Thank you again, Rebecca, for joining us and for taking the time. I believe it will probably be on our next agenda, but I'll coordinate with council leadership for when this gets put on the town council agenda for action.
Great, thank you.
Nate and Rebecca, I'll be in touch just about next steps. Okay.
Okay, great,
Thank
thank you.
Okay. Next up, we were provided just before this meeting, and it is now in the official packet for the meeting. Some draft FY20 audit, not audited yet, but financial statements. And I think Ruth you're probably excited to get these off of your desk.
Yes.
Liam, could you share the exhibit A2?
So these are still in draft mode.
We wouldn't be sharing them if we didn't have a high degree of confidence. I mean, draft in that this is what will be sent to the auditors, and we don't expect there'll be much of any changes, but they reserve that right, I suppose.
Yes, as they do their little piece. There is one number that I know will be changing. It's on the last page. It just has to do with changing a current portion of accrued compensated absences. So I don't expect it to change too much, but that's the last piece I think on this page. But so in total, if we just stay on this page, it shows the total excess deficiency of revenues, the excess or deficiencies of revenues over expenditures. It's about midway down, yes. And if you look at the actual column, it shows that we're kind of overspent by 1,251,000. However, to put that in context, the line above it, or a couple of lines above it, is the capital improvements, capital equipment we do. 90% of the funding for the capital equipment is funded from bond proceeds. Bond proceeds, the way we have to record this is part of the audit, shows below that excess revenue deficiency line under other financing sources and uses. So, to some degree, it's a little misleading. I know our bond rating agencies tend to question how come we're in a big deficit. And even though I've tried to explain to them that we need those bond proceeds to cover that capital, they still don't like it. But essentially, that's a big chunk of that. In terms of, we have transfers in and out, that has to do with the other funds that we have, the special revenue funds, the capital projects. As a project in capital projects closes, we take those funds and we transfer them back to the general fund. If they were taxes, they just go to the general fund balance. If they were bonded proceeds that we didn't fully spend, they still go to the fund balance, but they can only be earmarked towards debt interest. But because our debt budgets are so high, we don't track those individually because they're not a lot of money, essentially. The other pieces, if you bear with me for 1 second, of the transfers in include school impact fee monies that the council has authorized the school to use for various programs. Those come in. Higas Parkway monies come in or go out depending. And then we also have a couple of other impact fees. Dunstan is one, and I think this year Higas is starting in. Those are impact fees that can be used to offset debt. So those monies come in to help offset the debt payments that we make. In terms of the transfers out, that includes any TIF monies that we receive that need to go back to the special revenue funds like Higas or New England Expedition, Downtown TIF. There's also transfers out. The school uses a chunk of it to fund their school lunch program this year. They needed to fund it more than they have in the past. So that was a big chunk of it. About 442,000 actually. So you work through all of those numbers. The use of bond premium, we received bond premium in our $7 million bond issue. A portion of that has to show here. Again, accounting law requires that. And then the bottom line, the overlay, has to do with a couple of pieces. We had some abatements, fairly large abatements. I'm thinking it had to do with Walmart and Sam's, but don't quote me on that. And then for some reason, Betty, the state reimbursed us an extra $50,000 above what they should have reimbursed us, so we had to pay it back. And that's also built into that number. So you work your way down, it comes to another net change. And after you add all of those pieces back in or subtract them out, whichever way it goes, we come to a net of $1,094,949. And if you add that to our fund balance, beginning of year, this is total fund balance of 13,000,007. Oh, that's the wrong number. What is it? Of 14,306,229. We come to the final number, the 15,466,000.
So our essentially our fund balance has increased about 1.1 million.
And that's total. That includes school and town. So it's a combination of both.
And that's the number I was zoning in on when I quickly looked at this, is that, yeah, that's good news, right? That we're growing. It could have gone the other way given all the moving parts that happened in 2020. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that kind of improvement in our fund balance.
It's worth noting that nowhere on any of our financials is shown the over $4 million the school has received through two different tranches of federal aid, and nor should it. There must be some areas that will be touched, though. Ruth, you mentioned school nutrition. I think they're over and above because of a directive from the federal government that you must provide school lunch throughout this entire period.
Throughout that March through July period, correct? They had to provide.
So presumably there'll be some federal offset to what we're showing as perhaps a deficit in that area. I'm not sure how those will all be squared up in the end, but I do want to perhaps go back to the beginning just so finance members kind of appreciate, and what I think it's easier for me to understand anyway, that the first page, Ruth, is revenues.
First page is all revenues, and then, like I said, some of the transfers in, we consider revenues, but we have to report it that way.
And so you can kind of run through, and I think it's easiest to look at the second from the right, the variance column. just to appreciate how we've performed from a revenue point of view. And you can see where we've actually exceeded budget or come in short of budget.
The school had the largest really deficit, and that had to do with, at the bottom, you can see they had a shortfall of about $1 million, and our total revenue negative variance was $1,380,000. So there was a chunk of that. The property taxes had to do, abatements are built into that variance also. So not only did we have those two big ones that were prior year, but we also had some fairly large ones this year.
Ruth, can you explain? I was going to ask about that actually. What type of abatements would show up in the property tax line versus the overlay line?
Well, technically, I think they all should show up under the abatement, under the tax line, but per se, I think the large, it might have had to, I don't think it had to do with interest. I can look that up, and I don't really remember what the pieces were that made that up, but I can check into it and get back to you.
But it's split. It's split between the two places. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. But normally they always show right under the taxes.
Okay.
So it's not been as much on our side, I shouldn't say our side, on the town side as on the school side. But I did get a question from some residents about the government money that came in and what kind of drivers they might be. I talked to some school board members to kind of find out where some of that 4 million went. And we know about the 250,000 storage building that they were able to say was CARES because they had to put away tons and tons of desks and all kinds of equipment that we want back as soon as we're fully open. And a lot of it went into technology. And then I know there was medical help and, you know, other COVID expenses. But I think there's a question around anything that is going to really kind of raise the base operating level. So, you know, the nurses that were brought on, some of that was COVID funding. Are those going to stay in? And I guess, you know, we had a grant, and I'm not sure it was from COVID, Tom, for the communications position. And obviously that's something we're really happy with and we're keeping, but, you know, is there a way to find out, here was what the government money brought in, and this is what we did with it, and this is what's going to go forward, or what we're proposing to go forward in future budgets that we want to keep, that now the taxpayers have to pay for. So that was a question I got. I don't know, you know, if there's any way to get that information. I'm sure there is, like a list. I know the school board has it, but to find out what is the plan for keeping some of that, you know, that we ended up getting through the CARES money.
Yeah, I think you're going to see all those questions are very good, and you'll see that really materialize in their budget request for FY22. Keep in mind, what we're looking at here for financials is for the period ending June 30th, 2020.
Which won't have most of the COVID monies in it, revenue.
Barely, right.
Undoubtedly, we had 3 or 4 months of experience, but it didn't have COVID monies. And some of the things that I'm thinking of, and I hear you reference, actually happened after July 1st. So
Right.
it's probably going to, but I think all of those questions are certainly relevant and very important. I have seen some of their budget materials. They do provide a couple of pages of detail as to where how they've spent the money in kind of broad categories. But it may behoove the Finance Committee to spend some very dedicated time with the school to better understand the real detail of where that CARES Act money has been spent.
And on the town side, we just don't have the equivalent to that, or we just didn't get that level of money. So we really don't have anything we're carrying forward based on something we got funded from CARES.
No, in fact, I don't believe we've received any money. If we did, it was very small grant amounts. And I think most of that's received in the current fiscal year, not in the one we're talking about here.
Ruth, I wonder if you can help me to understand this a little bit better. Maybe the school nutrition's a good place to look, but when we get these federal grants, right? So we get approved to spend some money that we'll later get reimbursed for. I assume we're spending the money under the general fund and then it gets shifted over to a separate fund when the money comes in? Or how does that work?
What we try to do, because we have to really segregate the monies a little bit, so we try and put all of the grants, most of the town grants anyway. School, I think, does things a little bit differently, but we put ours under a special revenue fund. And so the expenditures go through that fund. So they don't always go through the general fund. We did have a grant this year that had to do with staffing costs. And so the staff continued to charge the general fund in FY21. And so we made a journal entry between the two funds so that the money essentially will have come, essentially the general fund will be reimbursed for those costs from the special revenue fund, where the grant revenues come in, if that makes sense. It's kind of an in and out kind of thing, back and forth.
So you'll move money out of fund balance into a special fund so that they can cover the expenses and then move it back after we get reimbursed? Is that?
No, the expenditures, except for this one grant, all of the expenditures will show in the special revenue fund. So they don't even show here in these reports. They show over you'll see it when you get the statements. It's under Exhibit C, I think. And the revenues also go in under C, that exhibit. So they don't always hit. The only time they might hit, as I said, is if there's payroll related costs. And then those get journaled back and forth between the two funds so that the general fund is made whole.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing this. I'm excited to, go ahead, Betsy.
With this particular format, it's a little hard to say. So it looks like community services came in under budget, but where did they end up with revenue? So their budget is based on what they're going to spend. And
so right on the first page, right at the bottom there in that bottom section that says unclassified, the 1, 2, 3rd line down shows that they budgeted 2.1 million. They only received 1.4 million, so they were about short of about 700,000.
Okay, and so, so in that, so Tom, with the hybrid care that we opened, with that budget, there was a $90,000 credit by a generous town person. Would that presumably already be in these numbers for what was received, or would that still be to come and would probably put us over 2 million in our adding to our fund balance then, or over 1?
No, I realize the months blend together, but we didn't do that until after the budget was approved. It was done in late August.
Right.
Yeah, I apologize. This makes it so much difficult because we're working with 3 years essentially now.
In community services is especially hard because they get their revenue okay.
Split, yeah, anyway.
Well, this was really, that 729 would have been because they couldn't run summer programs in 2020. Okay.
That was probably the single biggest
hit they took. Okay. Yep. All right. Thanks. Sorry.
Yep. And then page 2 is the expense performance, which might be of interest to you as well. So it goes by broad category. You'll see general government, which is the first grouping. We actually overspent, and you can see in particular there were 3 areas. Personnel, benefits, looking further down, legal. That was really embroiled with a number of high-profile legal matters that we had in front of us last year. And then risk management, I believe that was largely unemployment insurance, unexpected, at the tail end of last year. And then the good news is, if you look at all the groupings below that, public services, safety, public works, and education, they actually turned their own fund year-end fund balance. Basically, they didn't spend all that they could. So in the end, you'll see positive performance in the order of 1.1 million or so.
And then also, which might change that personnel benefits piece a little bit, is that we have a reserve under our special revenues for unemployment, and it had built up just under a couple $100,000 balance. So the actual amount that we'll be transferring back into the general fund I think was like $100 and something thousand. So, that will help offset some of these numbers as well.
So what we needed to spend in unemployment is what made up some part of this 211?
Yeah.
What was the other part of the two that made up the 211?
There are some contractual agreements regarding like sick time that's over a certain balance goes into our retiree health savings, paid out time when people leave. It's those types of things.
That type of thing. Okay, thank you.
Liam, can you scroll down a little bit? I don't have my printout. I just wanted to point out, I was particularly impressed with where public safety and public works had come in. Given that I know that they were under extreme pressure during the pandemic to keep going. So I thought their expenditures coming in almost to what, $750,000 ahead of plan was impressive. And same thing with public works.
I think we did have, didn't we, was it this year that year that we had a curtailment order in place as well, Tom?
Yeah, it started in late November. So clearly that.
Between that and the COVID.
Yeah, and I put that in place before COVID was ever even a thing, so to speak, based on some other known things coming our way, abatements in particular. We knew, I forget what the other drivers were, but I'm glad we did so early in the year because we were really able to tighten our belts and end the year in a good place because of that.
Any other questions for Ruth? Oh.
I just have a question on next steps. So it sounds like this is our close to final to provide to a third-party auditor, and then they audit it, and then something comes to the council. Can someone just kind of share with me the process a little bit?
So we'll finish up our work with this. The auditors, they've been getting a lot of this piecemeal already. So we give it to them, they turn around and ask us a lot of questions, kind of like what you're doing. And then we respond to them, provide them with some detail. And then they take essentially this information and they start to put it together into the budget document. And then, so we provide most of the information and then they essentially bind it and send it out to us. Mm-hmm. They'll do a draft first. So we'll get the draft of the whole thing, not just, 4 pages or whatever. And if I'm sure we could probably have that given to the finance committee at whatever point that happens. And then once we sign off on that, then they send out the real ones.
John, it's important to note that they do not work for staff. They're hired by the council and they are independent. And so those staff, Ruth and her team provide them the essential information. It is their unqualified, or it's their independent opinion about our financial status. I have spoken directly to our lead auditor. He appreciates the challenges that we've had and has assured me, because Ruth has been sending him things right along, it's not as if he's starting from scratch, that he will have things done in the next 10 days or so in time, suffice to say, before I present the budget.
So what we'll have then is a statement of opinion, I think, from the auditor, right? That says that, things appear consistent and within, for the things that they look for, they seem to be reasonable or not. They might have some findings that we would have to respond to. And that gets published. Now, is that separate than the annual statement, Ruth?
No, what they call it an opinion, and it'll either be a clean opinion, which is what we want, or might have some qualifications to it. Back in the day, we used to get qualifications for the fixed assets because it wasn't required. Nobody did it. But I will say Scarborough had it in place before they made it a requirement. So we were kind of ahead of the curve way back then. But since then, we haven't had any issues. The other piece that they sometimes do will be called a comment letter, which might say, hey, you should have done it this way, not that way. You forgot to include this accounts payable. And so then we have to respond to those and say, oh, okay, we fixed it. It won't happen again, kind of thing. We didn't have one of those last year, so FY19. So I'm not sure if they'll find anything this year that might pop up.
And please appreciate, what they provide is a complete financial reports. We're just giving you one exhibit A2, because that's what Ruth was able to get done most recently. And frankly, it probably is the best document to kind of, if there's a single place to look, to talk about where we ended the fiscal year.
Yeah, so this is the document from last year. You can see it's kind of extensive. It has a lot of pages, almost 150 pages. And
maybe
so-
this will be an okay place to kind of ask some questions around that, because I know we have coming up on the agenda furthering the auditor. And so I didn't have time to look at a lot, but I noticed, our expenses are around 45K and Biddeford is spending around 35K. I know these auditors charge differently. And I was just wondering, only because I've been through this before, related to, some past work I did where our audit expenses were quite different from towns our size, and come to find out, and this is nothing that I'm saying is the case in Scarborough at all. So this is no judgment or any kind of suppositioning, but we were providing information in a way that wasn't as useful to them as it could be, but they just always took it. And then they did a lot of manipulation to it, apparently. And, when our treasurer sat down with them for, a couple hours or more meetings, said, well, if you provide it in this way, I think we cut our costs by like 40%. So I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do that, but it's since that point, it's always interested me to kind of look at what different similar sized towns spend on that audit versus, where that falls. So Biddeford seemed to be kind of a good match budget wise and size wise. So I was kind of interested to see that they're spending, they're budgeting at least 10,000 less than we are budgeting for that.
I think, I know in the past, but one of their explanations had to do with the number of staffing and the number of hours that they actually spend doing an audit in terms of the thoroughness of what they do. So I think that plays a part into it. The other piece I wanted to check on real quick, which I haven't done, is whether or not that includes the school department. Some communities, their schools are totally separate, so they don't, but.
Well, it can't be apples to apples. It's too different between towns, but it's just sort of an interesting point to me. You're happy with them. They seem like they do a great job. So I'm not questioning that, but it's just interesting to see the cost difference sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's really only a couple, unless things have changed more recently. There are only 2 or 3 auditing firms that really can do the in-depth work for the town of Scarborough. We have so much more. We have the TIFs, we have the oceanfront property. There's a lot more in Scarborough than there is in other communities.
Right, it's a lot of complexity.
Thank you, that was the word.
Yeah, sorry.
It's funny you looked at that, Betsy, because I didn't look at what other towns were spending, but I did look at who their auditing firms were. It's something that the state auditor maintains a list on their website. And there's only 3 towns, I think, that use what was MacPage is now Whitfly, I think, which is our auditor. It seems like a lot of, including Biddeford, a lot of our peers use firm Kirstine Willett.
Runyon Kirstine, yes.
Yeah. And I know nothing beyond that.
Yeah, I'm with you, but yeah, it's just an interesting thing to kind of look at sometimes. And it's interesting to look at audit reports when they come out of different towns,
We've had both firms. When I first started here, Runyon Kirstine ran for probably 10 or 20 years. And we went out to bid and MacPage came out with the lower bid, and since then they've been pretty competitive. The last time we went out to bid. The reason we bring this forward is because the contract actually ends as of June 30, 2020. So we would have to go out to bid again, which in a normal year is not an issue. But with this year, with us being so far behind, still trying to catch up, it just doesn't make sense for us to have to kind of stop what I'm doing here. We're getting ready to go out to bond, so we're going to be starting that process. We're in the middle of a budget to then have to stop all of that, send out a RFP, go through the RFP, come up with something that might change the budget amount, you know, at a time when it might be more difficult to do that. So we're just asking for that 1 year extension. And then once we do that next year, we will be definitely
Go out to bid again. Yeah, that makes sense.
Just to add to that, I did take a look through the charter, and it's our responsibility as a council, not necessarily a committee, to appoint an independent audit firm prior to the end of the fiscal year. So we would have to appoint them prior to the June 30th. And then we're also supposed to get the audit back by the end of December of the same year. So when I saw this come forward, I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to do that. We're 3 months past due right now. Maybe we should shake things up, I guess it was what I was thinking, but I understand and I appreciate Ruth's comments there and her point that, yeah, we're treading water, and this will help us hopefully get on a better pace for next year.
Yeah, just to be clear, delays for this audit are not caused by the auditor. They're caused by delays on our side. So they should not be held responsible in that regard. And frankly, I credit them for appreciating where we are and turning it around very quickly. I think they're dropping other work to be able to push this out for us.
So what are you looking for us? Is it a recommendation to the full council? Because I assume this would have to go to the full council.
Yeah, it's odd. We don't, to my knowledge, recollection, we don't do annual appointments. We appointed them in the first instance and have worked within the confines of that contract. I think we're looking to extend that existing appointment for 1 more year. And it certainly could be a council action. It sounds like it probably should be.
And in the past, part of the contract says that the finance director can extend it within the contract, and we did that these past 2 years. It was a 3-year contract, and we extended with 2 1-year extensions, and this is the last of that second year 1-year extension.
So I guess what I'd like to see is just this, I think it should go to the council, and I think it can be a pretty simple action item just to authorize the extension.
Yep.
And then at least you're doing it with the consent of the council and it's clean with the charter.
And they're the ones who ultimately, if we had gone out to bid, they would be the ones approving or authorizing the end.
So this is the third, so we're asking for a 4th year or a 6th year? So like we had 3 years and they've had 2 extensions already, or?
Correct. So this would be a 6th.
Oh. What were the other extensions for as opposed to going out to bid?
Just the timing of things.
And frankly, they performed extremely well.
And they don't increase their price very much for these additional extensions. So
the reason the contract allows the finance director to extend is that there was the contract includes an understanding of what pricing pertains. The difference here is that we don't have that, and so we don't have authorization to extend beyond what the contract says. So undoubtedly, it is a council action.
Gotcha.
I mean, we could go out to bid. It's just that we probably wouldn't with these other pieces that need to get done first. We probably wouldn't have a number until after the fiscal year ends anyway. So,
Right.
When do you start to actually engage the auditor?
the auditors normally come in around March or April to begin the that year's. So under our normal year, they would be coming in around March or April to start working on the June 2021 audit. They start to gather preliminary information. They have to read through all the council minutes. They do all of those types of prep work. They might start pulling invoices or ask us to start pulling invoices. It's preliminary work, bank confirmations, things like that.
So right now we should have somebody in place pretty much now.
Right, but I think they may not be as behind as we are, but they're also pretty much not working in the office either. So, it makes it a little bit more difficult to transfer the information back and forth.
So I'm happy moving this to council. I don't know if anybody wants to motion that we do it with a favorable recommendation, or if you want to just let it sit on its own. You're on mute, Betsy.
Sorry, I'd say just send it to council.
Okay. Thank you for that. John, you're okay with that too?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Just send it forward.
Excellent. It was actually, I was very pleased to see the financial results, or the preliminary ones. I'll be interested in the other parts as well. But there was really a lot of movement in FY20 in terms of revenue and expenses, and the fact that we came out pretty clean, or at least at first glance, right now it looks like we came out pretty clean in a favorable position, means that it was well managed. So, good job.
Thanks.
I want to skip long-term planning for a minute and see if we can have a discussion of the process and schedule for the budget, because I think that's pretty important. As you are aware, Tom has shifted his presentation by a week to allow for some time so that we could get the audit in our hands before we start the next budget process. And that's created, it condenses our time frame, I guess, as a committee. So initially I was going to wait until we had the budget presentation for us to talk through when we wanted to meet with different departments and stuff, but maybe we should start thinking through that stuff a little sooner. It also impacts communication. I know that Leon sent a note out earlier today about we were going to be going out with a special newsletter, e-newsletter on the 8th that is really focused on just the budget. And I'd be interested in any opinions on whether that makes sense to do on the 8th or if after first reading it feels more appropriate. So anyways, I want to jump to item E and talk about our schedule. Any thoughts from the committee in terms of how we want to approach our review of the different departments or subject areas?
Is there a specific page you're looking at, John? You were looking down.
If you go to the very end of the agenda,
Okay.
there's the FY22 budget adoption. I'm looking at two sheets actually.
Liam, can you pull that up?
Yeah, we'll see if we can pull it up.
And, okay, great.
Here we are. So we still have the validation vote on June 8th, and walking back from there, the second reading of the council is on May 19th. Tom, it feels like that's as tight as we can make it. Like we couldn't push second reading, could we? And still hit a June 8th referendum?
It gets very tight. I mean, the voters by then, Tody is sending out absentee ballots. She won't accept them back till the budget's approved in second reading. And so I think that's the risk you run of really tightening the window.
Okay, so we could force a week in there if we needed to.
We certainly could. You could meet multiple times a week. I'm not suggesting you need to do that, but I think there's other ways to kind of play catch up. One suggestion would be to talk about how you want to approach budget review, and that might help inform how many meetings you think you need. The only thing we have down really is school department on April 28th. We're kind of open and my staff's available to respond to your desires in that regard. Past finance committees have done it all sorts of ways. Back in the day, they used to bring everyone in. That didn't seem to be a very productive use of anyone's time. More recently, there's been more of a targeted look, and maybe you need to see the proposed budget and then have a conversation around where you want to spend your time and attention.
I guess that's where I'm leaning still, but I wanted people to at least get thinking about it, and maybe the week after the presentation, or later on that week after we've had it'll probably be the week after. Maybe we should have a special meeting to come up to formulate our game plan, and probably before first reading, because I don't know what's going to happen with the presentation. So I want us as a committee to at least be prepared for how counselors might respond, and hopefully steer us through it in a reasonable way. So I guess that's probably going to be my first suggestion, is that after the 14th, we try to get together as a committee. After the 7th, but before the 14th.
Right.
So, Tom, do you think you'll have anything high level before the budget presentation? This department is increasing by this much, this one's reducing, that type of thing. I know last year, as I recall, we did look at the budget and then say, let's take a look at X, this, and this. And that's kind of how we made the decision, was based on what was in the budget. And also your recommendations, because you kind of point out where things have changed, right?
Sure.
And say you may be interested in looking at this because this has changed, or there's a challenge here, or there's so.
I don't recall providing that before the presentation, but I think anytime after that.
Maybe not. Yeah.
And that, frankly, that's where you can make up some time. You'll notice that the review schedule starts on April 21st. So it's the week after first reading. There's nothing that says you can't begin your process before, or, even that week of first reading. So I think there's opportunity there. The only challenge is if there's particular departments you want to meet, we just need to schedule them in. So we need a little notice, but not much.
Do we need, again, like when I look at this, we have 1 2-hour block that's various departments, and then we have another 3-hour block on the 12th that I'm assuming is bigger than just looking at the capital improvement plan. Do we need another date with a 2-hour block? I watched the school board workshops, and I just liked how they had kind of 2-hour blocks to kind of go through everything. I just don't see how, if we only have 1 2-hour block on the 21st, if we're really going to be able to get into all the things we would want to get into, or do we need another day that week, or another date that we have as a block of time in case we need it?
Well, I agree. Last year was a weird year, but we definitely had to add in to get everything done. I mean, there's no doubt about it, but it was a crazy year.
You might recall, we also had the luxury of, I think June, the primary was extended into the first or second week of July. So we had extra time on the back end, and that helped for a longer and more robust review process. There's nothing that says we have to align the school validation vote with the primary, but it just makes intuitive sense, practical sense. Our voters are showing up, we're paying election workers. That's when you're going to get the highest voter turnout. So that's why we always focus on the primary date.
John, how about going 4 to 7 on the 21st, but having it we'll have 2 buckets planned for. And unfortunately, I don't know who yet, but
yeah.
And then we have the joint budget workshop on May 5th. So that's the week after the 28th. But maybe a Monday or Tuesday of that week to get another session in, and that's probably going to be enough, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. That sounds like a good plan. I just want to make sure we have the time allocated in case we need it, and if after the 7th, whenever we meet, we might decide we don't need it, then we can take it off. But I just would rather plan for it.
And it would be ideal if you could find time to meet sometime after the 7th and before the 1st, certainly, but maybe even before the 14th, to identify what you'd like to talk about in that first session. That way I can make sure to have staff available.
And I think if you, like last year, Tom, you would get late breaking information, based on what the state was doing. A couple of times, I think we took that to, or at least once, we took that to a whole council workshop. So that could also be, I mean, these again, it's not, hopefully won't be like last year, but it's not really a normal year this year either, because there's things we're hoping to find out that we'll make adjustments if we do find out.
Yeah, I don't expect God help us all if it's the same level of uncertainty. The big looming question is this federal COVID relief and how, if at all, it comes to benefit us. And I don't have a timeline. Those details are not yet available. So I'll make a passing reference to it in my budget, but certainly not including any resources. Hopefully, we'll know more before you have to adopt it, if there's any benefit to our bottom line.
Right. Well, that's when I found out, that's when I kind of looked up Biddeford when I saw in the memorandum that they're a metro area. I'm like, okay, they are, but we aren't. So they independently receive funds. We get ours through the county. So that'll be interesting. Not to pick on Biddeford, but that
Yeah,
was
to
me.
your point, 5 communities in Maine hold that distinction, and they have about the same amount among those 5 that the rest of us do.
Yeah, and I
Oh.
wonder how they got picked. I mean, like I said, not like they would pick Scarborough over Biddeford, but it wasn't based on size because we're similar in size and budget, so it was kind of interesting.
Order of magnitude, I expect we're going to be in a position for about $2 million specific to Scarborough, with great limitations as to what it can be used for. And therein is the challenge. Cumberland County is getting 57 million. Totally undetermined as to how they'll put that into play, whether that comes to benefit any local communities. And then there's all sorts of other direct funding as well. School gets its own. There's some for childcare. So this is a discussion point that we'll certainly be having over the next couple of months.
Well,
As I read, the school department had more flexibility with how they could spend the funds. Is what at least at first reading, they haven't built the rules around it yet.
Right. And of course, they'll not include any of that as revenue, if you will, in their budget appropriately so, for the same reasons that I won't. But again, there might be something that will benefit the bottom line.
at least at the state level, I was reading that, at this point it's going to court, but the funds can't be used for tax relief.
Right.
Which is interesting that got tacked on at the last minute, but that is going to court. So I guess we'll see how that works out. And I don't know how that applies to local municipalities. That was kind of at the state level, but
So I actually thought, Betsy, they could be used for tax relief. They couldn't be used to reduce the tax rate, which is
I
the
think it
subtle
was sort
difference.
of like a tax net neutral, but there's concern that it would even apply to, tax credits and all this stuff. And it's going to court.
Yeah.
It's beyond me, but
Hey, Tom,
Yeah.
yesterday at the Transportation Committee, Angela shared 5 projects that went, I guess, to GP Cog.
Mhm.
So what would be helpful, because this conversation is just making me think, like, where are all these potential funding sources and what are the projects they could support? Like what she shared yesterday, is that something that's like separate for transportation that's coming from federal funding that might support, certain types of projects? We've talked about, you've mentioned potentially 2 million, the county's getting something. Like, do we have a good grasp on where all these funding sources could go and how we could be impacted?
No, we don't, and we're not alone. The U.S. Treasury has not issued the final rules. They've given very broad guidance in terms of infrastructure. It specifically references water, sewer, and broadband. That doesn't fit well with any of the projects in our current CIP necessarily, because we don't have water or sewer, and broadband is an initiative. But the rules haven't been written yet. So
Okay.
you should know that within the next, I'd say 2 to 4 weeks.
So just bringing us back to, how's everybody's schedule look on Monday, April 12th? I know there's a communications meeting at 4. You think we can pencil something in at 5? Or 5:30?
I'm sorry, I've got competing demands here. Can you say the date again, please?
So April 12th, Monday, April 12th. Let's say 5:30, I guess.
If we could go with 5:30, that would be good.
April 12th.
And purpose would be to organize yourselves for the budget review.
Mhm.
Okay.
Don, you'd have to get you have communications meeting at 4 on that Monday.
I don't think we've been going much over an hour. So I think if we start at 5:30, we should be fine.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Okay, good.
And we'll do that virtually, so we don't have to worry about scheduling space. We can commit to that right
Yes.
now. Okay.
Yeah. And then why don't we'll put another meeting on the calendar. We'll use our time then to see if we want to put another slot on the calendar.
Great.
Perfect. And I guess between now and then, give some thought to how, questions you might have, how you might want to approach getting them answered. And given the condensed time, if there's going to be additional information that you want from the town, that's not typically in the budget book, I guess it's a good time to start thinking about those, and maybe we can put a list together at that meeting. Okay. So any other questions on or comments about the budget process or schedule?
Nope.
And John, you had sent a document related to financial reporting and long-term planning. We've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. I don't know if we want to table that discussion this meeting and bring it up again when we get some breathing room.
I
Okay.
do, but I do appreciate it remaining on there.
I do too.
And tabling it, because when I look at everything, it makes me think about it again and go, oh, yes, I need to go think about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And work on it.
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah, I
not
think-
on
I
the
think-
agenda, it's easy to not think about it, not work on it.
Well, I even think some of the conversations we had today, again, like with the Avesta thing, like if we had some sort of like long-term financial planning approach where we could look at these types of things and like plug it in and see how it impacts stuff, would make me feel better about making decisions. So I do think we need to continue to have the conversation. It does feel like we have a pretty crammed agenda on a lot of things, and it's important. So again, I would just go back to what we talked about of like maybe we have a workshop at some point. Like we have a booked next couple months, so I don't know when, but to give it its own time, I think would be a good thing to do when we're ready.
I did want to throw out one thought that I've been looking through the school budget, and it occurred to me that one of the benefits of doing long-term planning is it helps to give you institutional memory, right? Because you can look back and say, last year I thought this was going to be X and now it's Y. And going through the process of reconciling that difference gives you, I think, some deeper insights into the results and how things are moving or changing. So we hadn't really talked about that, but I think that's a good rationale for trying to do long-term planning. What the best mechanism is, I'm not ready to go there.
I'm curious, John, because I know you and Paul went to a GPCOG thing where I think they talked a little bit about goal setting and maybe something around financial planning. Was there anything you gleaned from there for like what other towns are doing from a long-term planning perspective, or?
There was some neat information shared from other counselors from other towns. I can't say any of them related to long-term planning. There are more to details about how they might manage or leverage TIF districts. A couple of them were, particularly in a reval year, they tried to create a TIF district before the reval so that increased valuation would get captured, which I haven't worked through the details to even know if that's, how the math works. But anyways, that was a suggestion. And then there's some neat tools that were shared around how they track. This would probably be up your alley, John, more than mine, but they have some tools to track as things come up. We should put that on a parking lot list or something and revisit it. And then when they do revisit it, then that particular spreadsheet gets updated so that they can kind of trace through how a particular idea may have come from inception to ultimate resolution. That's what I remember about it. Half of it was a presentation, and then the other half was members sharing comments. So those are the ones that stuck.
John, I beg your pardon. I know Betsy and I have a meeting at 6 and I have to host it. So I'm going to have to jump off here just so I'm available and have it open for others to join.
Very good. And I believe we outlasted the public. So we don't have any public comment today. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Liam?
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci.
Yes.
We are